The content of this podcast is based on medical fact and evidence-based practice from credible authoritative sources, but is not a substitute for your institution's policies, procedures, common sense, or good judgment. The views and opinions are those of Eric Bauer and FlightBridgeED in their entirety. This is the FlightBridgeED Podcast, critical care and emergency medicine education for nurses and paramedics. Here's your host, Eric Bauer.
All right, you guys ready to get started again? So, we've heard some great stories the last couple days about mental health and situational awareness and self-care. So now Mike's going to come back and present in a very unique way how to take those thoughts and moments from that one day. We all have those stories about that one day or that one time, whatever that may be, and pair that with music, combine that with music to get on the road to healing. So without further ado, I want to welcome to the stage a man who's never at a loss for words, my friend and co-host, Mike Verkest.
How many times were you basically told to keep your mouth shut about your feelings?
Suck it up, man.
Hey, it wasn't your emergency. It's fine. You'll be okay.
Just do your job.
Don't you see bad things all the time?
Bro, you'll figure it out.
How alone did you feel? Did you ever think to yourself that talking about calls or experiences or even listening to others and being able to relate to their story could be helpful? I want to challenge you to try something different with me today. Instead of learning with your eyes, what if you were to only use your ears? We are used to the visual, our eyes. Does that tune us into or out of our emotions? In this setting, in this room, what do our eyes deceive us of? Do they keep a segment of our brain dormant? Will using our ears unleash the power of our mind? Storytelling, personal stories, and music opens the mind to see and hear things in a different way. Billy Joel said, "I think music in itself is healing. It's an explosive expression of humanity. It's something we're all touched by, no matter what culture we're from. Everybody loves music." Music has been scientifically proven to have such a powerful effect on our mind. Recent research shows that music can help in many aspects related to the brain, including pain reduction, stress relief, memory, and even brain injuries. In the book, The Power of Music, Elena Manns says, "Scientists have found that music stimulates more parts of the brain than any other human function." We've all had a day that changed our lives, our careers, and it doesn't matter if it was a good story, funny story, or a sad story. The events of that one day shape us for the rest of our lives. Now, let's get into two stories from two paramedics who shared memories from a call from that one day. One is mine, and one belongs to Jeffrey Billick, a land and air paramedic from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. These stories are both deeply personal, and we think you can learn, relate, and even heal from listening to them. So close your eyes, pay attention with your ears, and get in touch with your emotions. And as you're doing that, how does the music change the light in which the words are spoken? Listen quietly and reflect. It was fall, October if I remember correctly, and it was chilly. It was damp, and I remember there being a little fog kind of hanging around. You know how it sort of forms on the side of the roads, and it's not everywhere, but it's just kind of low. The trees had started turning, and we were definitely headed into the darkness of fall. As we passed the main part of town and crossed the bridge, a call came in for a male that was bleeding severely.
Medic 1, respond to a severe bleed.
The dispatcher frantically told us the caller had reported that there was blood everywhere, and they could hear the husband in the background, and it sounded like he was vomiting. We hit the lights and went around. Our dispatchers were amazing, and even though we had a 10-minute ETA at least, she stayed on the phone with them the whole time, the wife actually, who was becoming more frantic as each minute passed.
The ambulance is almost there. Stay with me.
The dispatcher said calmly. As the minutes ticked away, the dispatcher told us,
I don't hear him in the background anymore.
and he's not awake. We still had 5 minutes to go. The streets were empty, the lights were reflecting off the fog, and the miles seemed like they were taking forever to go by. The wife was now reporting that he's not breathing, and that he was in the bathroom on the floor. The dispatcher encouraged her to try to do CPR, but she said she was too small, too frail, and there was blood everywhere. And she felt like she just couldn't get down there and do anything, but she would give it a try. I know we didn't say it out loud, but I know me and my partner were both thinking, why didn't we let the other unit take this call? At least I was thinking that anyway. As we approached the driveway to an older style ranch home, well kept and a few exterior lights on, one car in the driveway, and why I remember that I have no idea. But we hopped out, grabbed our stuff, and walked up to the front door. And this is the part that I always remember, and the reason I wanted to share this story, and it had always stuck with me. When she opened the door, she had the blood of her husband all over her face from trying to give him breaths. Her hands were covered, as were her feet. She must have weighed about 100 pounds, but that cold October night, she gave her husband of 50 years everything she had. As we made our way into the house, the smell of the blood was overwhelming. You could smell the iron in the air. We found the husband in the bathroom as reported, and unfortunately, he was beyond any kind of help we could provide. So we did what we always do. We helped those left behind. We gathered some towels and sat down at the kitchen table as she cleaned herself up. And it was quiet. And I think a lot of us struggle with the silence, but it's what she needed. She knew he was gone. She didn't need us to tell her that. What she needed was some time, and for us to just be there with her. We followed our local protocols, no need for the medical examiner or investigator, and we took care of her. As all that was going on, I just couldn't help but think of the word love. I had only been married about 4 years when this went down, but it was love. Love shined through in the most traumatic time ever, and she exemplified it. She didn't care that when she answered the door, she looked like a ravenous lion on the Sahara who had just finished off a zebra. That blood represented the last minutes together on this earth, and it didn't matter. And I want that. I want that kind of love for me and my family. And I don't remember her name, and I certainly don't remember his name, but I remember the love. Undying, unfettered, unfiltered love for a husband. And that was my memory from that one call. That one day. My story was about love. And I learned a lot about it that day. I never knew why I remembered that call so vividly, and once I shared the story, I understood why. And it wasn't for the reasons I thought it was. It was about hope in the face of sadness. Now let's listen to Jeff's recollection from his call that one day.
The story of my one day is easy to remember because it's one I'll never forget. This story is about my friend Chris. The story starts a few nights before May 31st, 2013. At the time, I was working in remote northern Ontario as a flight paramedic on a fixed-wing aircraft under contract to Orange, our provincial air ambulance system. Chris was actually the sole reason I got hired a few years earlier, after slicing his hand open trying to get a life pack battery out with a kitchen knife. A friend and former paramedic classmate told me about a temporary opening, as that area of Ontario isn't exactly bustling with stacks of resumes. I was previously working land EMS out of my home province and jumped up to the opportunity to return home and also take care of people in the air. After Chris returned to work, we became rather close. Sometimes we only shared a crossover day together. Other times we had a few days or a week together. We also hung out on our time off back home in southwest Ontario. Chris had recently transitioned to the rotor wing asset, and back to the start of my story, we were having an impromptu going away barbecue. In just a few short days, Chris was leaving our base for one slightly more south with a schedule more conducive to a family life. We had a fire, we drank, we laughed, and that was the last time I saw Chris. On May 30th, I was working night shift on the fixed wing, and Chris was working as well on the rotor wing. We chatted briefly over Facebook in between Chris's rounds of stupid Farmville, and he told me he was turning in for the night, hopefully. Just before midnight, Chris was tasked with picking up a patient from a First Nations community about 130 miles north of us. Shortly after midnight, on now May 31st, his aircraft lifted off, and contact was lost a short time later at 0011 hours. I didn't know this yet. When the aircraft became overdue, our communications center contacted my captain. They asked us to get to the airport and nothing else, which was an extremely odd request. We went into the hangar and our captain called again, where a second odd request came. We need you to weather check the immediate area. We were very used to weather check point A to point B, and that was it. The weather was cold, it was rainy, but aviation conditions were good. When he accepted the call, we were then told that the rotor wing was missing and last seen only a few kilometers from the airport. We were being tasked to grid search, and that our search and rescue was on the way but would be a few hours. The pits in our stomach wasn't actually really describable with words. We quickly fueled up and we launched into the darkness, that night completely black, with what those in aviation know as a black hole effect type of night. We searched line by line for over 2 hours, searching for any signs of hope. A flashlight, embers from a fire, anything. My head was pressed so hard against our windows that night it didn't take long for the migraine to set in. Eventually we landed with nothing to show for it. By this time word had spread around and the airport was quite a bustling place. Land paramedics, other flight paramedics, police, townsfolk, just awaiting news like we were. We sat in our crew pickup truck right out on the tarmac and we awaited search and rescue. Just as the sun rose, search and rescue techs showed up in their Hercules, and even in the dawn of light it took them some time to find the site. We eventually watched the paratroopers jump. About an hour later, our ramp guy knocked on our window. It was the phone for me in the hangar, my boss, calling from Toronto. I took a big, deep breath and said hello. We all know paramedics are simple types. His dialogue was short and to the point. They're all dead. I actually don't even really remember what was said beyond that, but the call was brief. I smashed my coffee mug against the hangar door and I took a short pause to go tell the same news to my awaiting crew still sitting out in the pickup truck. We had some time off in the days and weeks ahead. Fielding multiple phone calls and texts saying thank God you're not dead from my friends and land EMS colleagues back home was quite jarring. I didn't know how to respond other than I'm good. I was extremely stressed to fly at night for a while, but eventually got back in the saddle. I had buried any feelings I had deep to carry on with the job I still had to do. Back home, I also worked part-time for a land paramedic service as well. In retrospect, I probably should have taken some time away from both of those services, but I didn't. Over the next couple months working for my land service, I had 2 very difficult pediatric deaths, and I just buried those 2. Thought I was good. And then over the next year, I became lifeless. I worked. I continued to function just fine clinically at my job. My performance didn't suffer. But that's it. That's all I had was work. I stopped the gym. I stopped hanging around with friends. Eventually, I just didn't leave the house. My then spouse at the time became a roommate. My family, my personal relationships all suffered. And then in the summer of 2014, about a year later, I remember another one day. I just did some shopping at Walmart, and on the way back to my car, something just came over me. I can't really describe where the thought started, but I broke down crying in the parking lot, hard. I crumpled up into a ball next to my car. I was a fucking disaster. Somebody came over and asked if I needed an ambulance, to which I immediately replied, hell no. I cleaned myself up, and a quick glance in the rearview mirror told me what came next, that I needed some help. I needed to talk to somebody. I needed to do something. Over the next few years, I did some counseling on and off as needed. I was on some medications for a while, and after a lot of work, brought myself back to where I wanted to be. In fact, I'd argue that thanks to Chris, I'm probably more resilient in this career than I ever was before. Very little bothers me now, but when it does, I become very conscious and undertake whatever steps I gotta do to fix it. So, where am I going with my story about my one day? It's about how Chris made me realize that this career changes you as a person. Some people for the better, some for the worst. But no matter what, we stand side by side through good times and in bad times, right or wrong, like the totally dysfunctional family we are. The beers, the war stories, the successes and the failures, the smells, the sights, the noises. Some we'll never remove from our minds. And at the end of every shift, we try and wipe that slate as clean as we can to be able to do it all over again. But every single time we wipe that slate clean, a few pieces of dust linger and pile up. And it's important that we take extra effort once in a while to scrub hard and get those hard spots off, because there's only so much room on that slate. And then eventually, when it's out of room, the dust gets on us. We need to remember the most important part of this job is the lights or the births or the saves. And those are great things, don't get me wrong. But the best part of this job is us and that person sitting next to us. We need to look after ourselves and them, because without them and us, none of those successes would even exist. The life under the lights, it's doable because of each other. Take time for yourself and take time to care for that partner next to you. Thanks for listening, and thanks, Chris.
See, we both managed a way to turn days of grief into days of hope. When I was recruiting people to help contribute to this project, I remember getting a message from Jeffrey, and he wasn't too crazy about the idea of sharing a very personal tragedy. And as you heard, what ended up being a behavioral health crisis, shared with the world. He wanted to share. He knew in his heart that there was a chance that his story, no matter how difficult it was to tell, and that isn't that different than many of you sitting here in this place, could help people. So he did it. And what do you think happened when he did? Yeah. Message after message of support and encouragement, and a lot of, that was me, or that was my friend, or that was my coworker. It led others wanting to contribute and share their story with the same goal, to let you know it's okay to feel the way we do, and we all have these shared experiences. That one day just isn't about sad days. It's also about the moment you realize somebody invested in you 10 years ago and you didn't even realize it. It's about those future moments in our career that haven't happened yet, that will inevitably shape us, and the ones that follow behind us.
It's time to take the tape off. Share our stories. You might be wondering what these shoes are. Sorry. That's the call I'm not ready to talk about yet. I don't know what I learned from it that day. I know I learned something. I don't know what it is. Well, we'll save that one for another day. Thank you.
This has been a production of the FlightBridgeED Podcast, leading the way in pre-hospital critical care and emergency medicine education.